Great. So what we're going to talk about today is really what do you need to think about as you're implementing a drone program. And the exciting part is that we've seen that in 2018, a ton of our clients and the people that we're talking to have actually budgeted for drone programs. And they usually in 2017, we've been talking to clients that have no budget, they haven't thought about drones, and then they're asking questions about how to get started. But now in 2018, we're really excited. We're going to see definitely a big increase in enterprise teams getting started. And then also it really seems like public safety is getting really ramped up. So that's also another really exciting thing that's going to start coming through in the next few months. So what we've seen a lot in 2017 has been what we're calling a trial crew, where either it could be a police department or fire department, but an enterprise team has tasked a group of, let's say, 6 to 8 pilots to go out and figure out exactly how this program is going to work and what they're going to use, what software they'll be using. And I think a lot of the clients that we talk to really hope that this trial crew is going to figure it out and figure out, oh, it's really easy. When really what they find out is that there's a lot of variables, there's a lot of different decisions that have to be made. The person that's usually in charge typically doesn't have aviation experience, and they're just trying to go off of what they think would work the best. And really what we recommend is this trial crew. And what we've seen across all the different verticals that we've seen is everybody has a different idea of how their program is going to work and how that program should be implemented, even in the same industry. So there really isn't an answer. A lot of companies are just trying to sort of send these people out and say, figure it out. And what we're hoping, we encourage you to do a trial crew, because that trial crew should figure out and plan for scale. The worst thing that you could do is have the trial crew come in and say, that they're going to train 8 people, and they might use the Mavic, they might use the Matrice 210. We don't know what they're going to use, and then you onboard 100 pilots and decide, oh, we need the Inspire, and now everybody's like using different equipment. That's just bad for scaling. Really, what we're recommending is using these trial crews to build out your program and have them fail a lot and make a lot of guesses and try and like really push the limits to figure out what they need to be doing. And then from there, go ahead and develop your program. Almost all of the trial crews that we've worked with this year are getting the results that they were hoping to get, and seeing that drones are saving them time, they're saving them money, they're safer, and they're moving forward with drone programs. And honestly, like, we are a little bit nervous about it. 2018, it seems like every person and company that we've talked to has a budget now for drones in 2018. So we've all been waiting and waiting for sort of this wave of adoption in the enterprise world. And from our side, we're getting some insight that it seems like it really is going to happen early 2018, which is exciting for the whole industry.
Yeah, so when it comes time to think about scaling, obviously there's going to be a lot of variables involved with that as well. That's why, again, when we take the time with the trial crew, we're trying to lay that foundation and answer those questions so that then we can look at the scope and go from there. So when you bring more pilots on board, obviously that creates a management issue that you have to deal with. You need internal procedures. You need a dedicated team. You need a dedicated flight director to be able to sit down and manage that process. Before you can scale, you have to have your SOPs established. In aviation, we live and die by procedures and checklists, and it's very important that for consistency, both in terms of safety of aircraft operations, also consistency of data collection, you have those standard processes and procedures in place, and you've taken the time to do that. The test crew, that's where, again, they're going to be looking at different solutions in terms of hardware, in terms of software, in terms of workflows, flight profiles. So they're going to be the ones that are going to determine, what are the ultimate platforms, the ultimate payloads, and solutions that we're going to utilize whenever it comes time to scale. They need to be able to, identify the use cases. A lot of times when we start talking to people, they're thinking about 50 different things that they could potentially use the aircraft for. And then, once we start really boiling things down, some of them might start falling off to the wayside for the immediate time frame. And they might, again, focus on, let's say a core 3 to 5 different applications that they're really going to make sure that they can spec out everything else in terms of hardware, software, processes, and make sure that they can stay consistent with that and evolve that and expand that to those nationwide operations. Same thing in terms of, the FAA documentations, your waivers, your authorizations. We're hoping that some changes in that are in the works right now. We've heard from the FAA that they're already at the point where they're they're thinking about incorporating things like night flight, certain things related to flight over people, into the existing Part 107 regulations. Unfortunately, the White House administration a few months ago basically put a freeze on any new regulatory developments. So that kind of handcuffed things for a little bit, but we did just get a new announcement about, again, some new programs with Department of Transportation with the support of the White House that should help speed that process back along again. Things like the LANC system for instant airspace authorizations that was announced recently and starting to come online. So things that ultimately should help in that regard as well.
So as you go through and start standardizing the resources that your pilots will depend on, there's a lot of different aspects to think about. And I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that, unfortunately, most of the people that are running these programs don't have a ton of experience in drones or aviation. And I think the ones that are playing it more safe seem to have a better plan and seem to have a more thought out process. Broadcast media has been particularly interesting for us. We've worked with almost all the major news networks, and they all have totally different plans of how they're implementing these programs. And it's sort of like terrifying, the ones that are different, like on the two ends of the scale. So some of them are so strict, they will never let a pilot fly unless they've been approved, they've been vetted, they've flown in front of this one person, they've done like 100 different things. Others are just sort of letting everybody that just fly, do whatever you want. And then they're realizing that that is a huge mistake. So that's sort of where we're coming from, that if you're in charge of your program, you don't want to be the one that let everybody go fly and do whatever they want and then realize they all have different standards, they all have different answers to different questions. Like, it just becomes a total mess. So some of the things that you need to think about and why standardization is so important is creating clear guidelines. If you only have 8 pilots, you know them all by name, you have all their cell phone numbers, you could call them, you could check in on them, they'll tell you if there was an accident, you could problem solve with them. I mean, we had this problem at DARTdrones going up to 40 flight instructors. That's a lot of people. I can't call them every day and make sure that everything's perfect. So there really needs to be clear guidelines that are written and logged so that people know what to do in case there is an accident or there is some sort of problem on the job. And then also making sure that before you grow this program and sort of compile onto the chaos that really is out there, that you've set the standard. This is exactly what your job is. You're going to be doing ABC, and this is what happens if D happens, and that's it. Like, you're not doing anything else. With your trial crew, it would be great to have them testing a bunch of different stuff, really maybe trying some different platforms, maybe trying out some different software. But before you scale, it's really time to commit. And that's what we're trying to help these companies sort of agree to, that they need to just commit and then grow their team from there. And really implementing the correct team and equipment. It's been sort of interesting. We've had a lot of our clients like wanting to train their, even we've had some like accountants in the classes, and we're thinking, why is there, like, doesn't the accountant have other stuff to do? If you're really going to make drones a true part of your program, there actually needs to be a department where these people are likely doing full-time work, or someone who has a bandwidth an extra 20 hours a week that they could commit to drones. That's been one of the biggest mistakes that we've seen, is that some of our clients think that they're just going to go out and let people fly once and have 3 months lapse, and then they'll go fly once again. If they're not current, that's going to be a huge problem in terms of safety, having people current. There's firmware updates all the time. Like, they need to be really doing this every day in order to be safe pilots. So Colin's going to talk a little bit about some of the different things to consider when standardizing and scaling your program.
Yeah, so one of the first things that we cover with the test crew is basic flight training. Usually what we try and do is we work with our clients to identify the training platform in terms of aircraft that's also going to mirror what they ultimately may intend to use down the road in terms of their operational aircraft. Obviously, in a lot of cases, the operational aircraft, more expensive payloads, more expensive systems. So we're not necessarily training those pilots, those brand new pilots on that aircraft right up front. We're using what we call training aircraft or training drones to accomplish that. In a lot of cases, we utilize DJI aircraft because that's it's going to fit the needs of the clients that we're working with. And the nice thing about utilizing the DJI systems is it's very the systems that we use both on the training platforms, if we call them, as far as the Phantom series of aircraft, even the Mavics. Almost identical when you start getting up to, again, those larger platforms, more advanced systems, things like that. So it keeps that process consistent at a very early stage, which is important. You also need to understand, again, what systems, what payloads are you going to be utilizing for those operational use cases. And so you have to plan for training, not only initial for that point where you're getting up to the actual operational standards and procedures and your workflows and your flight profiles, but also continuing education. Everyone's probably heard the term biannual review at this point. If you're working on a FAA certification, if you're working off of your remote pilot certificate, those of us that have been involved in aviation and have worked as pilots, we know all about biannual reviews and what needs to be done. So, it's all about making sure that you still have the knowledge, you still have the proficiency, and so ongoing and continuing education is also very important in standardizing that as well. We want to make sure that we can onboard new pilots in the same way, send them through the same training curriculums, but also make sure that the existing pilots are keeping their skills sharp and are getting those opportunities for continuing education along the way. You may, as again, you establish those initial use cases and you prepare to scale in that front, you may also encounter new opportunities as far as new use cases. And you have to look at the process the same way. Are the training aircraft going to be suitable for the new aircraft platforms and the new systems that you need to utilize? Or are you going to have to look at a new workflow to bring those on board? So ultimately, whatever you end up deciding, you need to make sure that your pilots and your teams are going to be able to utilize that. And there's a logical progression of training that you can follow that will be repetitive among those teams. In addition to looking at your equipment, we also have to look at the internal processes. So I mentioned SOPs early on. You probably, in many of your businesses, many of your organizations, you have SOPs. You have your standard operating procedures, those policies that dictate how you're going to do things. And that's, again, extremely important when you look at the unmanned aircraft side as well. You want to make sure that you can anticipate those potential issues that you're going to face, and that is what the trial crew's there for. They're the ones to go out in the field and figure out, what are the roadblocks that we're going to hit in terms of the environments in which we fly, in terms of the different software, hardware, payload combinations that we're utilizing. Different people that live in different parts of the country are going to experience things differently. Just because you're working in a particular application that uses an unmanned aircraft for mapping purposes, doesn't mean that every type of mapping application is going to be the same. So again, you need to standardize things, based on your specific applications, your specific environments, and again, your specific profiles. Data collection is a huge part of this as well. So, standardizing data collection and data management. I think probably the biggest money waster, the biggest money pit that a lot of companies fall into when they start looking at unmanned aircraft, and we've seen it, they've come to us, after they've hit these roadblocks, has to do with quality of data. They get the aircraft, they get folks certified in terms of Part 107 as pilots, and they quickly realize that, that perfect software solution or something like that someone pitched to them that said, okay, just go out to the field and turn this on and it'll take care of everything for you. It's not quite that easy. You still have to be able to, again, configure that software to be able to make sure that the data you're collecting is going to be usable when it comes time for processing. we hear it time and time again. People are losing thousands and tens of thousands of dollars because teams have to go out and they have to refly certain areas over and over and over again because they were not properly trained, or they did not establish the correct procedures as far as, again, that standardization and configuration, how to assess an environment, what does that mean in terms of the actual software solutions, and then going from there.
The next piece is really defining your crew and deciding on the different factors of how big will your crew be. If your crew is going to be 8 people, it's a lot easier to be nimble and to really change what they're doing and change the processes, check in with them. We're talking to a lot of enterprise clients who plan to have over 1,000 pilots across the country who will be flying under their name, and they're going to have to trust these thousands of pilots. How are you going to trust these people that you've never met, you've never seen them fly, you don't know if you could trust them? There's just a lot of pieces that go into it, and really think about your organization, and are you going to have so many pilots that you need to just say, we're doing the minimum to start, and those pilots are approved for the minimum, and then we'll have some like elite crew that could go out and do some of the more difficult work? Or are you going to keep a smaller group so that you could keep changing? I mean, the industry changes every 6 months, like everything changes. So it's hard to update people and keep them up to date on what's new and what's happening, the different software, the different hardware even. A lot of our clients have asked about flight operations directors, and that's very thoughtful of them for the future to be planning on having this one person who will be in charge, who will be tasking out the pilots. And that's definitely something to keep in mind. I think, like, how many people would you think you need before you're ready for a flight operations director?
Really, there is a flight operations director that's established even when we work with companies at the test crew size. So when they identify the first, 4, 6, 8 individuals that are going to go through this, one person is tapped on the shoulder as that initial flight director, and they're the ones that are managing the efforts with that initial crew, and they're keeping track of what's discovered, and they're the ones that are coordinating those efforts. So really, you need it from the very beginning. From the point that it goes beyond just a single individual, someone still needs to have accountability for those efforts.
Great. And then the next piece is pilot qualifications. So we train, and we have trained thousands of pilots, and after they do our basic flight training, they're educated. They could go practice and fly by themselves. I certainly wouldn't want them flying for my company's name until they've gotten, I would say, like 20 to 30 hours of real flight time, having people come up to them, bothering them while they're flying, talking to them, figuring out how to manage different weather. It really will have to come down to this person who's developing this program as, what are you going to allow your pilots to fly? Like, what's the minimum? And I think a lot of the companies that we talk to, it's a little exhausting because we're trying to tell them, like, you really don't want people out there flying unless they have really, really, really great qualifications and you've seen them fly a lot and know what they can do. But a lot of companies are trying to get this thing started and get their program going, and they're trying to cut corners. I think you need to think about it as a company. Are you going to cut corners, or are you going to do this the perfect way from the start? And that's a personal decision in terms of what your company is comfortable with. Another big piece is the visual observers. Some of the clients that we've talked to plan to use visual observers really, really actively, and they're actually going to train people to only be visual observers and not even be pilots. This is true in a lot of broadcast media. So that's another piece. Like, will you have 3 pilots go to a job and 2 of them act as a visual observer, or do you want some like lower level people that are trained less as your visual observers? And then making sure that you really define your data management, where you're going to store your data, and where are you going to, how are you going to use this data that you've just set up your program in order to use drones for data management. So what do you do?
And make sure you consider, your internal security protocols as well. A lot of folks who work within public safety, obviously cloud-based solutions for data processing and things like that, you can't do it. You've got these things like chain of evidence and everything else. And even a lot of, your in terms of corporations, and, talk to your legal departments, what considerations do you need to have in terms of those solutions. So, you might be looking at a particular, processing solution for software, and it may seem like the perfect fit, but you find out that there is no local variant that you can use to meet those requirements. So again, you need to take those things into account as well.
So the last part is really scaling this crew. So you've already thought it through, you're ready to go, and you're ready to scale your crew. The biggest piece that we see as just a huge, like, overwhelming problem that I think is being underlooked right now is onboarding drone pilots. Like, so you guys, if you're sitting in this room, you've already learned 100 important things that you need to know about drones because you were at this conference. But when someone's new to drones, every single thing is a question. They don't know what the software is. They don't even know how to log into a Kitty Hawk account. They don't know how to do how these software interact. There's so many different things that you need to learn to be a safe, competent pilot. And that's what we're really working on developing for enterprise clients, is a really clean onboarding process to make sure that everybody hits the same target information and make sure that everybody has been quizzed on hitting the same information, so that when one pilot's out there flying, they could count on the other pilot having been taught the same information. If it's not a planned out process, it's going to be all over the place. Oh, we forgot to tell that guy how to download the documents. Like, I mean, there's just so many little tiny things that would be forgotten that need to be planned out ahead of time. Making sure that you have the right software and that your software is going to work for whatever crew you're going to use. And then really building out a standard operating procedures manual. There's a lot of definitions of a standard operating procedures manual. Ours that we build for clients is like a 70 to 80 page document that's custom built, and really we're diving in with their legal team and defining, like, what can someone do and what can't they do, and what do you want them to do if XYZ happens. And they're really defining that so that a pilot just lives and breathes the SOP. And if they run into something that isn't in it, then they're able to sort of adapt it and have really a clear guideline for their pilots. Also, to think about mission-specific training. A lot of the clients that we work with, they start with Part 107 and basic flight training. We are really advocates for mission-specific training. Every single drone mission is totally different, and you're running into different issues, different software issues, different data collection issues in each different type of flight. So we recommend getting your team started on one specific flight profile and getting them, like, really comfortable there, and then expanding into additional flight profiles. So just some crew, I'm running out of time. So crew training documents and continuing education. Literally the industry, I've said this already 3 times, but it actually changes every 6 months. We have to update our classes every 6 months. Things change. How are you going to make sure that your clients know of regulations changes? How are you going to make sure that your pilots know that Lance came out? Like, you can't just count on them just like staying up on the Facebook pages. Like, you have to make sure that they have checked it out and have learned what you need them to learn. How are you going to track them through that process? The other part that is just so important is, if you really plan to have a big crew of pilots, you really want them to be able to speak the same language as each other. If you're going to use your Dallas pilot with your Houston pilot, you really do want them to have the exact same training, the exact same onboarding process, so that they could connect and work together. And it's not like, oh, we can only use the Dallas guy with Mike because those two only know how to talk to each other. So that's another huge piece to consider in terms of, will your pilots be meeting up together? So there's a lot to consider, and I think we may be a few steps ahead of, like, where the industry truly is, but it's really important, I think, for companies to really think this through, so that you can really scale once you're ready to commit to scaling and you get the go-ahead. And we're excited about 2018. We think it's going to be a really big year for drones. So the next step is to really go out and plan your needs and team requirements. Think through what you're going to do if you're starting at the baseline, and then how you're going to use your trial crew through that baseline. And then really utilize your trial crew. If they mess up or if they crash, like, it's okay. Like, let's let them practice and sort of push the limits and test some different stuff, and, like, really try them out, send them to conferences, have them ask a lot of questions. And from there, plan out how you're going to grow and how you're going to implement your plan, and then implement that way and really commit to it. And the last piece is just to continuously evaluate your program. Now it's the 4th time I said it, that the industry is constantly changing, but there might be a better software, there might be a better platform for you, there might be a better payload for you, and you could really scale up and change your whole program when this better technology comes out.
And definitely any good SOP or internal policy and procedure is not only going to be scalable, but it's going to be adaptable. So, these need to be fluid documents that can be modified as new use cases are identified, and again, is going to allow your company to utilize the aircraft to the best of their potentials.